Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a table talk. It is great to be with everybody on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon. Today is September 6th, 2023, and my name is Erwin Lopez, and I am the co-chair of the Beloved Community Leadership Team, which works alongside the Bishop's Anti-Racism Task Force. And we're very excited today to be interviewing Rabbi David Kay. Rabbi David is ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, and he has served in Orlando since 2004, and he's the chair of the Interfaith Council of Central Florida. He's a native of Chicago, and he has his bachelor's degree in Ecology, Ethology, and Evolution from the University of Illinois. And part of the reason why I wanted to interview Rabbi David is because the vision of the Beloved community is to build communities that are interfaith and that are non-faith as well. And so I wanted to hear and learn from somebody who has been doing this for quite a while and who has been at the forefront of this work. And I even was reading a little bit about Rabbi David, and he was given the keys to the city by Maitland, which is a smaller city here in the Orlando area. And so I figured he'd be a perfect person to learn from. And hopefully our interview with him will inspire pastors and laity to get involved in their community, to get involved with people who are of different faiths and different backgrounds. And so really looking forward to this conversation. It's actually my first conversation with somebody who's doing the interfaith work. And this is going to be a treat. So thank you so much, Rabbi David, for being with us. And I'm looking forward to hearing your story and learning about your background. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in this work.
Sure, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here. Appreciate the invitation. So my journey in interfaith work really begins with my own birth. My father was a Jew by choice. He converted to Judaism before he married my mom. My mom had one sister who never married and passed away when I was very young. So all of my aunts and uncles and cousins were Catholics on my dad's side of the family. And I learned from a very young age how to live in the broader world with people who have different beliefs, have a different tradition, have a different faith than you do. That kind of stuck with me. I grew up in a neighborhood in Chicago that was very much not a Jewish neighborhood. Jews represent less than 3% of the population in the country. I think we were probably about a third of a percent of the population in that neighborhood. It was also a very anti-Semitic and virulently racist neighborhood, unfortunately. But that also taught me the value of dialogue and the value of maintaining identity, even under very adverse conditions. That kind of went with me through high school, into college, and as an undergraduate. And I was involved in a couple of other kinds of interfaith organizations, but it really came to the fore for me with my going to rabbinical school. That's a very insular sort of thing, going to a seminary. Everybody is your denomination. Everybody shares your basic theology, and shares your tradition. And it can kind of push you off the track a little bit. It can get you thinking that everybody thinks like you think, which is understandable and is something that we're all really comfortable with, surrounding ourselves with people who think like we do and feel like we do and believe like we do. But it's also a very unreal experience because in reality, very few people think or feel or believe exactly like you do. Similar, there's overlap, but everybody's got their own take on it. That was a valuable lesson. I started rabbinical school at the Jewish Theological Seminary at the age of 40. So I had lived in the real world for quite some time before I jumped into that kind of insular life there. The other fortunate thing for me was that the Jewish Theological Seminary is on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. So you're living in New York City. You're not, kind of really cloistered somewhere away from the diversity. Once I got ordained, interfaith work was very important to me for several reasons. One was my own experience, my own family, the things I had gone through as a child, and my positive and negative experiences as an adult. living in the big wide world. It was also important to me because that was the way things are. There's a broad diversity of humanity. I see that actually as a theological manifestation. That if you believe in an infinite authority or power in the universe, then that means there's going to be an infinite variety of human beings as a manifestation of that infinite power or authority in the universe. It was important to me then to be exposed to that, to understand it, to see where people were coming from. Saw a lot of, it's hard to use the word dialogue, especially today, because it isn't really dialogue, but a lot of interactions between diverse groups of people that were extremely negative. And that bothered me both as a rabbi and as a human being, and frankly as an idealist. I don't seem to have lost my idealism with the passage of years, but it became important to me to understand the other, and as a minority faith tradition, very small minority faith traditions in the country and in the world. I thought it was specifically and important for Jews to understand those other folks around us. We live in a majority culture that is not ours, and if we don't understand it, if we don't have some sort of common ground, and if we don't embrace the difference, that's where problems come from. It is really misunderstanding or misrepresenting what the other thinks, feels, believes. So I had already been engaged in the Interfaith Council of Central Florida when we came to Orlando in 2004. I got involved right away, and had been helping to coordinate the annual interfaith multicultural celebration of the life and legacy of Martin Luther King with the city of Orlando's MLK Commission, and already was pretty deeply involved. And then I went on a seminar with other rabbis from my denomination and other denominations. We spent a week in Israel, and we met with folks from all across the political spectrum and from different faith traditions. And one of the things I learned there that was really an awakening for me was a session with a fellow named Yossi Klein Halevi. And he wrote a book called Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor. And this is a series of 10 letters to a hypothetical person living in an Arab village that Yossi could see from his apartment in Jerusalem. And he describes his narrative, his understanding, and he tries to understand the narrative of the person that would be living in that Palestinian village. He had the book translated into Arabic. He put it on the internet, and he said, anybody who wants to read this book can do it, and anybody who wants to respond to my 10 letters, please do. There was a young academic named Walid Issa who responded, and they actually did a book tour together through the United States, where they each just told their own narrative of what their experience, their history, their belief, their culture, and their understanding of what's happening in that region of the world. And that's all they did. They listened to each other's narrative and said, I understand that that's valid for you, even though there are things in there that I disagree with, and will never be able to agree with, without giving up part of my identity. That was really transformational for me in my own work with the Interfaith Council of Central Florida, because I realized that something my teacher, Dr. Mary Boyes, told me a long, long time ago, which was the problem with interfaith dialogue, and really with any kind of dialogue at all, but especially when there's marked differences, is we look for the common ground, which is a good thing. Don't get me wrong, it's a good thing. but that's where we stop. We know we have differences. We know those differences are very, very sharp differences. And yet, for polite conversation, we pretend like they're not there. We just say, we know we disagree on those points, so we're not even going to bring them up. According to Dr. Boys, that's where interfaith dialogue ends, and that's why we don't make any progress. Is because we don't embrace those differences. We have to be willing to do that first. That was her theory. And so between that many years ago and Yossi Klein Halevi a few years back, it really transformed my thinking. So today, the mission statement of the Interfaith Council of Central Florida begins with the words to embrace irreconcilable differences and cultivate shared values to reveal our best selves as individuals and a community. But I really do believe that the very first thing we have to do before we even talk about our shared values is to embrace those irreconcilable differences. If we don't say first, look, I know you have a perspective, you have a worldview, you have an understanding and a belief, and that's part of who you are, an integral part of who you are. And if I don't embrace that first, whatever else we talk about is going to be, at least to a certain degree, false pretenses, because I'm thinking about what I disagree with you on, and that's coloring when we talk, how we talk about and how we hear our shared values. So once I have an appreciation of the difference, then I can cultivate those areas of common understanding, and do it with far more respect, in my view, anyway. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Nice. Thank you so much for sharing all that. You know, I wrote some notes when you talked about it, and I definitely want to talk about this idea of embracing differences. But I want to first start by asking you this question and touching on the fact that you learned a lot of what it meant to do interfaith work as a child. You talked about. And can we talk a little bit about that? The importance, because you're a father too. I read your bio. I'm a father, I have 2 kids. The importance of teaching children about diversity. Where do you start? How do you do it? How are you doing it with your kids?
Yeah, we have one son who's he's 27 now. But when he was born, I was just starting rabbinical school in New York. And so he was going to grow up, in his formative years, in that insular community, which he did, and it was deep immersion, and that was great because it was terrific for giving him a foundation in his family tradition. But at the same time, we were in Manhattan, and there was incredible opportunity to be exposed to such a rich diversity of cultures, languages, belief systems, and just people. You can't walk down the street in Manhattan without encountering just all kinds of folks, from the ridiculous to the sublime. Really, it's just an incredible microcosm of all kinds of humanity. And we felt it was important not to shelter him from that. Quite the opposite, just to go out and live in this city and take advantage of everything that was available there. So yeah, it starts really from the very beginning. I mean, your first social network is your family of origin, of course. Excuse me. But it is really true that it takes a village to raise a child, and how diverse of a village you create for your child is what's important. We didn't have that vast a diversity in our circle of friends or family, but we were living in a community, and even if you don't live in a major metropolitan area, you're living in a world that's got an incredible and rich and beautiful diversity. And the upside of things like the internet and social media is, if you use it judiciously and correctly, in my view, then you can also get contact with aspects of the human race that you wouldn't find anywhere else.
And you referred to insular communities, and for the listener, I had don't worry, I had to Google the word too. It's one of the few times I hear this word, but I'm looking it up here in the dictionary, and it says ignorant of or uninterested in cultures, ideas, or peoples outside one's own experience. And so you're really encouraging us to don't build insular communities. Can you expand a little bit more about that? And I feel like as a pastor too in the Christian churches, I see a lot of insular communities. So would you expand a little bit more on that?
Sure, it's it's easier to register that complaint when you're a small minority of the population and say everybody's excluding us, but the fact of the matter is, as a small minority community, it's actually easier for the Jewish community to be insular because nobody else understands us and there's just us and we're small numbers, and there's we stick together. That's not a bad thing in and of itself. When it becomes a problem is when you build that insulation around yourself and you begin to believe, or you do believe, that that's what the world is. We see that in fundamentalist approaches to whether it's religion or politics or culture or whatever it happens to be. When you work so hard to say that we have the right idea, and therefore everything that's external to that idea must be wrong, whether we've heard about it or not, whether we're aware of it or not, whether we really understand it or not. The religion takes a lot of heat for being elitist and for being the source of trouble in the world. I like to point out that if religion didn't exist, something else would create all of those problems instead. We do it in the name of politics. We do it in the name of culture. We do it in the name of our favorite sports team. And we do. We do all of those things. But what that tells me is not that religion or politics or sports are inherently dangerous, as some might claim, but that human beings tend to do the same kinds of things with whatever it is that they're passionate about. It's good to be passionate about something. It's good to be committed, but when it becomes exclusive in the sense that nothing else can even be considered as potentially valid or potentially beneficial, now you've got the kind of thing that leads to, honestly, that leads to bigotry and prejudice and oppression and war and genocide. The first step towards dehumanizing a group of people is to say, you're different, and being different is wrong. Different, yes. Wrong, that's a huge leap of judgment. And when we build those walls of saying, nothing beyond this boundary can be valuable or correct, we're actually setting ourselves up to be lured down that pathway.
I'm picturing you coming into some of these congregations that you've led with some of this background and some of this passion to do some interfaith work. And I'm guessing that there has to be similarities between leading like a Jewish congregation and a Christian congregation and trying to open up their minds, trying to get them engaged with interfaith work. Can you share a little bit about your experience in trying to lead your congregation in that way, and some of the pushbacks that you got, and even some of the successes, and how you dealt with both of those?
When I was in rabbinical school, I did a program called Seminarians Interacting. I don't think it exists anymore because it was NCCJ, which was originally the National Conference of Christians and Jews, and it was the National Conference for Community and Justice. And I don't think it exists, or if it does, it's in a much reduced form, unfortunately, because they did very good work. But Seminaries Interacting brought seminarians and divinity school students from a lot of different denominations, a lot of different faith traditions together. We did an extended 4-day workshop where we were all together in one place. And, when I was going to this thing, I had friends and family who were saying, wow, that's going to be explosive, having all those people together. In that experience, the most explosive moments didn't come between faith traditions. It came between denominations within the same faith tradition. So the idea of accepting difference and embracing it to cultivate shared values starts within a faith tradition itself. It was much more difficult to get a dialogue between denominations in my own faith tradition than it was to have a dialogue between Judaism and Christianity, because the people who wanted to engage in that dialogue were already predisposed to say, we need to talk to each other. If it's within your own community and there's a difference, it's like family, right? I mean, family can be very complicated, and usually the most difficult relationships we have are within our family or extended family. So in leading a congregation and saying, we need to do this, the first step really for me was forging community within the Jewish community, to say, we have these other synagogues of our own denomination. We have synagogues from another denomination. We need to come together as a community. And then, we can take that concept and say we need to move beyond that. I would even say that the same applies within, within a faith community itself, within a congregation. Everybody is not the same, not by a long shot, especially I'm in Florida, where there's a wide range of perspectives, political and theological. And it was, we had to learn to embrace difference there as well. You give a sermon and, half the people say, I know you were talking about the Democrats, and the other half say, I know you were talking about the Republicans. I consider that a successful sermon, by the way, because it means that everybody heard the message, and everybody was made a little bit uncomfortable by it, which is part of the job of clergy, I think. Expanding that to interfaith dialogue is largely a matter of also getting outside of the box. Although my teacher, Dr. Jeff Kress, once pointed out to me that thinking outside the box is really just thinking inside a bigger box. Important to know that. But what ended up happening, and still does in many places, is like when I first came to my last pulpit at Congregation Ohev Shalom in Maitland, our seventh graders learned world religions, but they were taught out of a book by their own teacher. So the perspective was all from, was all secondhand. Through my connections with the Interfaith Council, we started bringing in practitioners of those faith traditions to talk to the kids about their faith traditions, which seems pretty obvious, but it's surprising how often one faith tradition will speak for the other faith traditions, because they don't want to make anybody think that any of the other faith traditions can hold a candle to them. So you sort of have this one group talking for another group, and that's the first rule that violates the first rule, I should say, of interfaith dialogue, which is you don't speak for another tradition. What that developed into later on was, instead of bringing, clergy or practitioners of faith traditions to our kids at the synagogue. We took our kids to the houses of worship and the institutions of those other traditions. So not only did they hear about it, but they saw it, they experienced it, they walked through the door, and it made it much more real and much more relevant.
I really want to know how you dealt with the pushback, because I know you dealt with a lot of it. You had to, right? How did you deal with it?
Um, you know, a lot of it is leading by example, I think. You know, as the rabbi of the congregation, I'm not afraid of it. I'm not intimidated by it. When the speakers would come in, they were people that I knew, they were friends of mine. That means I had to have taken the time to build those relationships. It was very clear to the students, and we invited parents for all of those sessions, so that the parents who were there and even the teachers, that this was a relationship of respect, but there was also a clear understanding of our differences. Some of the other pushback was just understanding where the people who are pushing back are coming from. And quite often, I'm retired from the pulpit for 2 years now, so I can kind of go out on a limb more than I could before. But quite often I found that most of what was driving that pushback was fear. Some of it, I would say, from the perspective of the Jewish community, they're not wrong. There are many streams of other faith traditions out there, and particularly Christianity, to be honest, who are, kind of constantly on the lookout for, how can we convert some Jews? So there's a natural skepticism when other faith traditions come in. There's a long history of conflict between Judaism and Islam. And so, when the imam came in to speak to the kids, there were parents who were not happy. I can mitigate some of that by when I introduced the imam as my friend and my colleague, and told a story about some of the really wonderful things he did in the community, without it ever hitting the press. That helps some. But in some cases, it was just listening to what the pushback was, and hearing what was underneath it. And quite often it was fear or ignorance in the pure sense of the word ignorance, of just not knowing. And hopefully being able to direct people to authoritative sources, and sort of sane analyses of other faith traditions, and saying, you need to learn a little bit more about this. And here's a way that you can, or, let's talk about it some more. And then there were those people who pushed back, and they were not going to be moved. If this was just wrong, we don't talk to people from other faith traditions. They're wrong, we're right. Which is not a fundamental principle of Judaism, by the way. I should just kind of throw that in. Judaism does not say that if you're not a Jew, you're wrong, and your eternity is going to be suffering. Judaism basically teaches if you're a Jew, you should be a good one. If you're a Christian, you should be a good one, and so on. So that was really more of the problem of the person who was pushing back, and keeping that perspective was helpful. And it was also, this goes back to embracing irreconcilable differences. There were those folks, and there are those folks still, for whom this is just not a thing they're going to think about. They have made up their mind. They're really kind of, ossified, set in stone in the way that they think and believe. And nothing will move them or persuade them. So that's where the embracing part comes in. This is what you believe. This is what you think. I'm going to let you know that what you're saying doesn't have foundation in fact. If you tell me that, this faith tradition, people representing or who claim to be representing that faith tradition have done certain things, yeah, they have. But that's what they claimed their religion taught them. That's not what the religion teaches. And so, you can cling to that falsehood, or you can look for the truth, the deeper truth.
No, I appreciate that. And part of the reason why I asked that is because I don't know if you know, but the United Methodist Church right now is going through a split. And there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of tension. And I was just wondering if you could give some of us going through this some advice on, because I'm sure you shared your own share of splits in your life. Let me ask you this question, David. Because you've been working with so many different people for such a long time, different backgrounds. What have you learned about people? What similarities, like what have you learned about people?
I learn new things every day, and there's that's a very general expression, but it's pretty much true just about every day. There's something that surprises me. It doesn't always surprise me in a good way. We had a bunch of people with a hateful message who were in town over the last weekend. But that is part of the human condition. Probably the most important thing I've learned about people is that everybody, no matter how they present themselves, everybody is fragile. We are breakable. We are mortal. We are easily damaged. My undergraduate degree in ecology, ethology, and evolution, I was studying animal behavior and evolution and the interaction between species and their environment. And it just probably after every day of classes, it just became more and more apparent to me how vulnerable human beings are. All of the stuff that we've built and the tools and the technology and the buildings and the whole nine yards, those are all things to make up for the fact that we don't have teeth and claws. We don't run very fast. We don't have a hard shell. We don't have any scales. We don't have venom. We're really just very vulnerable all the time. And we're also the one species, as far as we know, that has this sense of self. In other words, that we can think abstractly, that we're aware of things in the world, that we can create something or think about something that doesn't exist. Now, the humanists on the Interfaith Council of Central Florida will tell you, yes, that's what religion is. that's human beings making up something that doesn't exist to calm themselves and mollify themselves because of their own vulnerability and mortality. We do have representatives from the atheist humanist community on the Interfaith Council, because that's a significant part of the population, and that's part of the dialogue, and that's one of those irreconcilable differences. But what a faith tradition ought to be doing is giving people the tools to navigate that, and to understand the connection that they have to each other, to their own community, to other communities, and to the world at large. That's specific to the idea of, what have I learned about people? We find ways to reassure ourselves. And not all of the ways that we find to reassure ourselves are constructive. We convince ourselves that, we need to be tough. We convince ourselves that we need to be physically strong. And, to weather life's challenges, you do. But underneath all of that is this shared insecurity, that we're here temporarily. We don't know, we had no control over coming into this life, right, individually. And we really have very little control over how that goes and where and how it ends. And so that's the downside of having this ability for abstract thought. Using whatever time we have is the great challenge of being alive, of being human. And the one thing that I have found, no matter who I talk to across denominations, across faith traditions, people who are unaffiliated, people who are agnostic, people who are atheist, people from different cultures, is that, you know, they would really like to just be able to feel safe and live their life. And that first hit home for me in a big way. My first year of rabbinical school in New York, there was a little bodega down the street from the seminary, and that's where all the students went to get, you know, to get soft drinks and you know, and a muffin or whatever else when you were between classes, when you had a few minutes. And it was run by Palestinian Arabs. And I didn't know that at the time. I mean, I knew they looked Middle Eastern, but I didn't know where they were from. And I used to go in every day, got the same stuff, you know, got a Snapple and a bran muffin. And after probably 2 or 3 months of being in there just about every day, young guy behind the counter says, you know, you go to the school there? And I said, yeah. And he said, I'm Palestinian. And I said, oh, okay, that's great. You know, love the muffins and the Snapple. I mean, I didn't really know what else to say. And he said, you know, we're friends. I said, sure, I'm a regular customer. I talk to you all the time. You're a great guy. You know, I mean, I would, if you weren't a Muslim, I would go out for a beer with you. But you know, I'd have a coffee with you. Definitely, that's great. We have a lot in common. And he said, but we're friends, and you're a Jew and I'm a Palestinian, and I'm a Muslim. And I said, yeah. And that was all he wanted to say. Was, you know, we have this shared humanity, and because our relationship was not fraught with discussion of politics or religion or anything like that, the initial contact that we made was based on our shared humanity, and the other stuff was secondary. It was each of us who had our own way of navigating through life, and trying to do the best that we could and be the best that we could in the lives that we have.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate your response. I appreciate your perspective. I have just a couple of more questions for you. One of the things that I've been studying is racial trauma. And it just comes from the idea that trauma is when you experience too much too soon. And as I have been involved in beloved community work, I've been involved in anti-racist work. One of the things that keeps coming up is those who are at the forefront of this work need to really take care of themselves, need to really take care of their emotions and their heart. And, you know, one counselor says that social workers, after a while, they tend to hate the people they're helping, you know? And so with all your experience, how do you take care of yourself?
That's a great question, and a very, very important one. You know, part of it is having the support of family and friends and community, and part of it really is worked into the work that I do. It's really woven into the work that I do, because I have the support also of my colleagues in different faith traditions and cultures and worldviews. And we can talk about and listen to each other about our shared challenges. You know, I mean, seeking out counseling and making sure that you're regularly taking care of your mental and emotional health absolutely is something that needs to be done. And I'm glad to see that in my son's generation, in our son's generation, the stigma that used to be attached to seeing a therapist or seeing a counselor is lifting quite a bit. When I hear him and his peers discussing that, they're like, you go to the doctor for a physical checkup twice a year. Why wouldn't you get a checkup for your mental health? Just check in and make sure that you're okay. And that's really, really encouraging, because certainly in my generation, and seeing the model of my parents' generation, if somebody was going to therapy, that was something that got whispered about, because it meant they were off. The other thing that's really, really important to do in this work is to take time off from it. You can't save the world every day. Some days it feels like you can't save the world any day, and you certainly can't do it by yourself. You need to have a balance in your life, and we just came back from a week or so in our hometown of Chicago, where we were visiting family and friends, and somebody asked me today, we just got back last night, well, what did you do over Labor Day weekend? And I could honestly answer nothing. We did absolutely nothing. We were staying with friends. We spent literally the entire day on Monday sitting around and talking, just enjoying each other's company, wildly therapeutic. The one other thing I would mention is the value that I found in my tradition, in Shabbat, in the Sabbath. Traditional Jewish observance of the Sabbath starts at just before sundown on Friday, continues until dark on Saturday, and it is a literal day of rest. I mean, we go to the synagogue, we have meals, we hang out with friends, but no commerce, no business, none of the usual stuff of the weekday. You take that 25 hours once a week and you disengage, not following social media, not turning on the news, none of that stuff. And it's very, very important. Not everybody can do it that way. I mean, that was my responsibility. I was a rabbi, but being able to say once in a while, here's a day where I'm not doing any of that. Whether it's just me time, whether it's family time, whether it's community time, but the change of pace is what's important. And I hear what you're saying, that folks who are doing this kind of work in the community, work in the clergy, being of service, it can really just sap you, take it all out of you. And you may not realize how exhausted you are until it manifests in a different way. So the self-care, absolutely. And I highly recommend, that concept of Sabbath, which, and I think if I'm not mistaken, you're on a sabbatical right now.
I am on a sabbatical.
Yeah. Still working, but but that it's the change of pace that's really, really important. And I'm going to guess you're feeling that too.
No, definitely. I've been engaged in this work, and it took a toll on me, and so I asked for this time off. And I'm on a spiritual formation type of sabbatical, which means that I do work about once a week, and so my work is just focused on the beloved community work. And my family and I, actually, when I went to Israel, I was really inspired by the way that everything shut down on Sabbath. And ever since then, I came back, and my family and I, we try our best to practice our own type of Sabbath, because I guess everybody kind of has, some do this, some don't do that. And so we try to embrace that as much as we can.
That's great.
I'm a big
That's
Abraham great. Joshua Heschel fan. So I guess my last series of questions just really has to do with the practical side of the Interfaith Coalition. So for somebody who's listening to this, maybe in St. Pete, maybe in Leesburg, or where do they start? Let's say they want to get involved with interfaith work. Where do they start? And also, what kind of work is the coalition doing? Like, what's happening in the community? What are they leading?
So I'll put in a quick plug for the Interfaith Council of Central Florida. You can email us at contact@interfaithfl.org, and that'll get you on the mailing list, the email list for our monthly newsletter, and keep you posted on events that are coming up. Right now, in the near future, we are sponsoring a series of 3 short films that are going to be shown all together for the Global Peace Film Festival that's coming up on, I think it's the 21st, Thursday the 21st, if I'm counting right, and that's going to be on the Rollins College campus. These are 3 short films that are focusing on the concept of restorative justice. And that's in contrast to punitive justice. So, the way we're set up now is somebody does something wrong, we find them, we put them in jail, we give them some kind of sanction. Restorative justice is the idea that in many cases, or certainly a majority of cases, it may be and probably is more appropriate to put the person back on the right track, give them something to do that makes up for what has happened, or gives them the opportunity to put their life back on track. So it's a very, very interesting set of 3 short films. We always, I mentioned this before, we coordinate with the city of Orlando for the MLK celebration. That's done the Sunday evening of the weekend before MLK weekend. I think it's January 8th or 9th this year. I can't remember, or in 2024. That's a gathering at City Hall around 5:30. We have a ceremony there and a procession to a downtown area church. And there's a 1-hour interfaith multicultural celebration. So the public is invited there. The public is certainly invited to the Global Peace Film Festival, not only our showing, but the entire thing. We've done programs, classes. We'll be doing more in the future. We did a series that we want to extend in the coming program year that was called Getting to Know Your Neighbor. And this started with our former, now retired executive director, Reverend Jim Coffin, who did it specifically for individual faith traditions. It started with a church group that was interested, and he did a series with them, getting to know your Jewish neighbor, getting to know your Muslim neighbor, getting to know your Sikh neighbor, and so on. During pandemic, there was we worked with the Holocaust Center, the Holocaust Memorial Resource and Education Center in Maitland, and did a series like that were all virtual. So that's a lot of what we do. We used to have a broadcast program. We're working on renewing that broadcast project. It sort of disappeared over COVID too. But its working title is Irreconcilable Differences. And the idea there is to model that kind of conversation where you're just listening to narratives and understanding the story behind the belief or the perspective, rather than engaging in debate between conflicting narratives. That's where we're kind of at the moment, but we do a lot of other work as well. We've done work with the Peace and Justice Institute. I'm particularly proud of work that we've done with World Orlando, which is another one of our collaborative partners. They are the facilitator for the International Visitor Leadership Program, which is through the U.S. State Department. These are folks from various parts of the world who come to the U.S. At the invitation of the State Department and visit different communities and learn about their particular areas of interest: healthcare, civil rights, LGBTQ rights, things like that. And we've provided an interfaith perspective for a number of those groups over the last couple of years.
Well, it sounds like you guys are really involved in the community, getting the message out there in many different ways. And so I'm thankful for your leadership and thank you for your time today. And I hope that this has been encouraging for those who want to begin this work, engage in this work. And David, I don't know if you have any closing words for us or any encouragement you want to leave us with. I know, the state of our nation today. I don't know how you see it, but I think we need some encouragement. And you have any closing words for us?
Sure. The Psalms teach us "Bakei shalom v'radfehu," that you should seek peace and pursue it. Peace, that word in Hebrew, shalom, that most people have heard. It's a greeting. We use it for hello. We use it for goodbye. It means peace, but it actually comes from a root that means to have all the pieces together, integrity. And so when we say, we're looking for peace in Hebrew, what we're really saying is we're looking for all of the pieces to fit together. We're looking for integrity. We're looking for everyone to be part of the whole, and none to be excluded. And that doesn't mean you want to have dinner with everybody. That doesn't mean you want to hang out with everybody. But it does mean that we're all part of the extended human family. And as I said before, family is sometimes the most difficult relationships, but they're still family. And none of us would be here without the others, and none of us would be able to survive without community. So as difficult as it may be, and as much as you may disagree, it's important to always keep in mind that we really do need each other. And none of us got here by ourselves. None of us are going to get through it by ourselves. And ultimately, none of us are going to conclude our lives by ourselves. There's always somebody who's standing nearby, and all you have to do is look.